The first sign that night was going to take its toll wasn't a noise or a light on the dashboard. It was an accounting detail I saw before leaving. A line in the dispatch app that said, "Automatic adjustment applied," with a value so small that anyone would ignore it. I didn't ignore it because I live paycheck to paycheck. Short freight rates, tight window, expensive diesel, and a company that loves to pay for performance when things go right and for compliance when things go wrong. Still, that adjustment seemed like just rounding up. Nothing that justified calling anyone and seeming paranoid. The load was standard, palletized, seal intact, destination in a few hours. I knew the corridor, I knew the exits, I even knew the type of people who refueled in that stretch. Routine had a way of convincing you that it was a bulletproof vest. I left at my usual time, with the truck responding smoothly, constant revs, and a stable temperature. I wasn't in a hurry. Haste is what ruins good decisions the most. I just needed to stick to the plan. After a good few kilometers, the average fuel consumption increased slightly. It wasn't a sudden jump. It was the kind of change you notice more through habit than by the number itself. I attributed it to the wind. At night, there was that dry cold that changes the air density and sometimes tricks the engine. When I looked again, the fuel consumption had returned to normal. That gave me the confirmation I wanted. Noise. The system recalibrated. I continued on. The road did what it always does when you accept the simplest explanation. The estimated time of arrival increased by 3 minutes. 3. I didn't even change my posture. The app recalculates for anything. A reduction in speed somewhere, a traffic reading that doesn't even really exist. It was still comfortable. Later, the first truly strange thing happened, only disguised as normal. The instantaneous fuel consumption began to fluctuate. It would rise, stabilize, then fall, as if someone were tampering with an invisible parameter. Still within acceptable limits, still without warning. I did what I always do when something doesn't cross the red line. I observed. If I slowed down, I would lose time. If I accelerated, I would burn diesel. The best course of action seemed to be to do nothing and let the system adjust itself. The notification appeared as if it were helping me. Alternative route recommended for cost optimization. I laughed to myself humorlessly. An alternative route almost always means a secondary road and less light. I knew the detour, and it was an invitation to waste time. I ignored it, and for a few minutes everything seemed to prove me right. Fuel consumption stabilized. The estimated time of arrival improved slightly. The road became silent again, as if it had tested me and accepted my decision. But the accounting details returned in a different way. The dispatch application updated the payment forecast, a few cents less. Then another adjustment, also small. It wasn't the amount, it was the frequency. Automatic adjustments shouldn't happen at such short intervals. I thought it might be a late synchronization, some bug, some delayed toll calculation. I'm not an accountant, but I read numbers because numbers become accusations. Still, nothing there gave me a formal reason to stop. The feeling in the truck changed before the dashboard even registered it. A slight resistance, almost as if the wind had shifted sideways. Except the wind wasn't shifting. The flag at a distant gas station wasn't even waving. I kept the revs, and the truck held its course. When the system sent another message, it was more reassuring than helpful. Performance within parameters. That's the kind of phrase that shuts you up. If the system says everything's fine, any doubt becomes something you imagined. Then the clock started ticking even though I hadn't done anything wrong. The margin I had was disappearing due to micro delays. A traffic light that took longer than usual, a stretch of road with a reduced speed limit, a slow truck that I couldn't overtake without spending more money. None of that was a single event. It was an accumulation. I decided to fill up earlier than planned, just to avoid high prices near my destination. It was a mature, economical decision, the kind any manager would praise if they were looking at the right spreadsheet. I pulled into the gas station I always use. The same layout, the same lights, the same feeling of routine. The pump they recommended wasn't the one I usually use. I don't like replacing pumps when I don't need to, but the other one was under maintenance and I wasn't going to argue with a full parking lot. I filled up with diesel, checked the gauge, paid, and got the receipt. Everything seemed normal. I got back on the road and for half an hour nothing happened. That was the worst part, because when nothing happens, the mind relaxes and calls that confirmation. The fuel consumption was perfect. The engine response was clean. The estimated time of arrival aligned again. I almost forgot about the whole thing. That's when the first evidence of human interference appeared, but without a face. The app registered a compliance check on my profile. It didn't say why, it didn't say who. It only said that it had happened and that I didn't need to do anything. I know that kind of phrase. You don't need to do anything is the corporate way of saying you're already in the process. Even so, I had nothing to respond with. I didn't have a ticket number. I didn't have the option to dispute it. Just a digital stamp. The fluctuation returned, now more spaced out and more intense, as if the truck were economizing and consuming fuel in waves. I started doing mental calculations and realized that if this continued, I would arrive with my diesel margin at the limit of my insurance. My decision was practical: maintain speed and avoid any unnecessary acceleration. I didn't want to become the guy who compensates with pedaling and then explains the high fuel consumption. I just wanted to arrive, deliver, and sleep. The road gave me another partial confirmation. The dashboard remained clear. No lights, no messages. The engine didn't misfire. Nothing required immediate action. The system again seemed to be telling me I was overreacting. When I stopped at a quick rest area just to stretch my legs and check the license plate, a patrol car appeared in the corner of the yard. Lights off. Just a presence. I didn't pay it any mind. A parked patrol car is part of the scenery. What bothered me was the app, which at that exact moment updated the expected payment again. Another minimal reduction. Another automatic correction. And along with it, a generic warning. Attention to route deviations and consumption. I hadn't deviated. I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. I was following the route I always follow. That put me in a strange position. If I called someone, I would seem guilty trying to explain. If I stayed quiet, I would accept the system's narrative. I chose to remain silent, not out of fear, out of logic. What was I going to say? That I was being reduced by sense? That consumption was fluctuating without warning? That's not proof. That's a feeling. And feeling doesn't beat algorithms. Before the final stretch, the electronic time recorder did something I'd never seen before. It didn't erase, it didn't freeze. It just delayed. The timeline fell a few minutes behind, as if I had driven less than I actually did. This seems fine until you remember that these things don't always work in your favor. When they do it to create inconsistency. I thought about restarting the device, but restarting mid-route creates a gap. A gap becomes suspicious. The alternative was to continue and let it sink. I chose to continue. It was the safest choice for someone who doesn't want to seem like they're hiding something. A few kilometers later, the synchronization kicked in, bringing with it a generic rest compliance warning. Nothing specific, just the kind of alert that exists to protect the company, not to help the driver. I had hours to spare. Even so, the message remained there, as a reminder that someone was watching. Further on, I passed an automatic weigh station that usually ignores me. That night, the road sign illuminated a "proceed to inspection" message for a few seconds, and then went out. I didn't even change lanes. There wasn't time. The warning disappeared as if it had never existed. That stuck in my head because it was the kind of thing that shouldn't blink. It's either active or it's not. Blinking looks like a human hand testing a trigger, or a system deciding whether it's worth pulling me along. The app, as if connected to the same nerve, updated the trip status once again. Extended monitoring. No explanation, no option. I did what I always do when the system decides to swallow you whole. I continued behaving in the most predictable way possible. I became more careful with speed, lane, and distance. I avoided overtaking maneuvers I would have done on any other night. I avoided anything that could become a camera angle and look aggressive. Driving well seemed less about safety and more about not giving anything away. Partial confirmation came. The monitoring alert didn't escalate. No requests, no blocks. The dashboard remained clear. The truck remained intact. And that pushed me to the next logical decision. Finish the route without drawing attention, without tampering with anything, without creating a story where there might not be one. But the more I tried to be predictable, the more the background details accumulated. Consumption dropping high, payments trickling low, generic alerts popping up the exact minute I was doing something ordinary. It was as if routine had become a trap, and I was treading carefully within it nonetheless. In the final stretch, the time margin evaporated. It wasn't a major delay. It was death by 1,000 cuts. I arrived within the window of opportunity, but without any leeway, the kind that makes you seem on the edge, even when you've done everything right. The delivery was clean, seal intact, signature obtained, door closed, nothing anyone could point to as a mistake. I felt relief, that fleeting relief that lasts until you look to the side and realize the bill still hasn't settled. 2 days later, the bill came due. The payment was less than expected with a cold line item, adjustment due to operational inefficiency, and attached was an automatically generated report stating that I had refueled at a non-approved gas station, that my fuel consumption had anomalous patterns, and that I had a compliance risk. The gas station was the one I always used. The pump was the one they sent me. The receipt was in my pocket. But the report didn't want a document. It wanted a standard receipt. I opened the app's history and saw that, on the night of the trip, someone had marked that gas station as under audit for a period of just a few hours. A short interval, precisely at the time I passed through. I had no way of knowing. I would never have known. I tried to contest it through the official channel. The system asked for a protocol number that I didn't have. It asked for evidence of a failure that I couldn't prove. It asked me to accept terms that stated the analysis was automatic and final. It was control disguised as a procedure. The loss wasn't just money. It was time wasted on calls, the hassle with the dispatcher, my rating dropping without me understanding the reasoning. It was the feeling that night I made a whole series of correct decisions and, even so, ended up on the wrong side of the spreadsheet. The truck kept running. The route continued to exist. The gas station remained open. Only I was left with a new rule in my head. When reality works normally, sometimes it's only because they've already adjusted normal to work against you. If you're enjoying the stories, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment. It really helps the channel. Let's get to the next story. When I opened the app that morning, the dashboard looked normal for a split second, as if it were loading the day's routes. Then, everything went blank. It wasn't a lack of demand. It was a permission void, the kind of screen that appears when you no longer have the right to see what's happening. At the top, a short phrase, operational suspension due to reliability incident. Below, no help button. Just a message saying that, to access the complete history, I needed to confirm I had read the updated terms and conditions. I confirmed because it was the only thing that allowed me to click on any other screen. I hadn't made a mistake. I had followed the procedure. The decision was based on data. That was it. There was no person, name, extension, or ticket with a deadline. The message itself made it clear that the process was automatic and final. The system only hinted at a path for gradual return if I accepted additional conditions. Before that, I only had the silence of the empty panel and an account reduced to a status. The incident was linked to a trip I'd made 2 days prior, a route I'd chosen precisely because it was predictable. Departure from a warehouse in the Sparks, Nevada area, delivery to a distribution center outside Sacramento. A typical route, a large client, a comfortable delivery window. I took this type of load to maintain a stable score and avoid relying on odd jobs. The report summarized everything in 2 lines: route inconsistency and critical delay. The word critical froze me because I remembered that delivery is clean. I mentally went back to the beginning of the route and started remembering details that I normally forget because work becomes a habit. I accepted the load in the app. The value appeared, the window popped up, the weight and the shipment number too. I tapped accept and received the standard confirmation. Nothing flashed red, nothing required extra reading, nothing asked for an unusual signature. The app treated it like any other freight, and I treated it like any other day. At the warehouse, check-in was via QR code. I stopped in the waiting area, took out my phone and aligned the camera. The reading failed on the first attempt. It failed on the second. On the third, it worked and marked check-in complete. The recorded time was a few minutes different from my watch, but a message appeared saying that variations in registration were normal and did not affect performance. I continued because the system always pushes you to proceed. If you stop to argue with a notification, you miss your dock, waste time, and the app itself registers your delay as if it were a choice. The gate opening took a while. Nothing drastic, just the kind of delay that happens when the parking lot is full and someone is checking paperwork. Instead of complaining, the app adjusted the estimated departure time. The status remained green, in compliance. I felt a slight unease with the idea that the machine knew I was stopped and was registering it as if it were my decision, but the screen said everything was fine. When the truck was sealed, the app required a photo of the seal. I took the photo. It said insufficient image and asked for another. I took another. It accepted. Then it asked for a photo of the BOL, bus log, and the dock number. I attached them. It accepted. Each confirmation came with that feeling of being stamped, as if I were compiling a dossier against myself without knowing what would be considered wrong later. Still, the interface remained green. Compliant. Always compliant. I left the warehouse and followed the standard route recommended by the app. The road was normal until I encountered a section with slowdowns due to roadworks. The app adjusted the ETA within a few minutes and displayed a notification. Neutral event, zero impact. I interpreted that as a guarantee. Zero impact means you don't need to make a decision. You just keep going because any extra pause becomes a delay, and a delay becomes another mark, even when it's not your fault. Further on, a suggested detour appeared. It wasn't a warning. It was optimization. The screen promised to preserve the fare and keep the delivery within the window. 2 options of the same size with no extra warning, no risk color, no caution phrase. I accepted the detour because, in practice, when the system offers you a route as equivalent, it's saying it's safe. I wasn't inventing a route. I was following the format. Soon after, the cell phone signal dropped. The screen went to synchronizing. This is common in certain areas, and I had already learned not to panic. When the signal returned, the app displayed. Data recovered, no action required. I continued with that automatic confidence that the app creates in your head. If there was a risk, I thought it would warn me. It always warns you when it wants something. It only doesn't warn you when what it wants is a record that you don't realize you're missing. Near the border, the app asked for confirmation of a regulated rest stop. I pulled over, registered the stop, and attached an external photo of the truck, as required for condition validation. I thought it was unnecessary, but I did it. The app turned green again. I returned to the road with the impression that, if I had done anything off-route, the screen would have changed color. It didn't. The delivery was clean. Check-in at the gate, dock assigned, unloading completed, receipt attached. Status, delivered. Payment, pending processing. I closed the app and went to rest with a sense of accomplishment. No message appeared at the end saying my route would be reassessed. No special audit warning. Nothing to suggest I had entered a high-risk area. The next day, an automated email arrived informing me that the delivery would undergo compliance validation. I'd seen this before. Large clients conduct audits, sometimes holding payments for a few hours. But this time the payment status changed to under review, and my load dashboard looked strange, as if the offer had shrunk. Even so, the app displayed a reassuring message. This review wouldn't affect my score. I believed it because it was the kind of message that keeps you going without asking questions in the wrong place. The following morning, the crash hit like a punch. My score plummeted, and the app registered a reliability incident. The reason? Critical delay and route inconsistency. I opened the report and saw specific minutes cited as delays, minutes that, on the day of the trip, had been classified as a neutral event with zero impact. The deviation also appeared as an inconsistency, even though it had been suggested by the app itself. The signal loss appeared as a synchronization failure, even though it had been treated as a common occurrence at the time. To view the report's attachments, I had to accept a consent form. The text stated that metrics were dynamic and could change. and that I was aware that the system applied retroactive evaluations when necessary. It didn't mention blame. It didn't mention error. It only mentioned awareness. I accepted because if I hadn't, I couldn't even see the complete report. It was like signing the door to be able to look at the room you'd already been locked in. That's when the dirtiest part appeared. A parameter called window integrity. The explanation stated that when a route is updated after acceptance, the time ruler can be recalculated. In other words, accepting the detour changed the clock. But the application didn't show this at the time of acceptance. It only showed it later, when it needed to justify why what was neutral became critical. I searched the log for the detour notification. It was there, recorded as my decision, with the date, time, and coordinates. There was a small sentence saying that by proceeding I agreed to adjustable performance guidelines. I couldn't possibly understand that while driving, with the map changing and the road demanding my attention. It was a sentence meant to exist in the log, not to be understood. The app then offered a gradual return. 7 days with restrictions, less access, more confirmations, more validations. Accepting was the only way to see any workload again. Refusing meant being out of the system without visibility, without work. I accepted. And the instant I accepted, the system recorded that the incident occurred under my operational responsibility. Again, without stating fault, but placing my name alongside the damage as if that resolved the contradiction. In the following days, the demands increased. A photo of the new seal, a photo of the odometer, a photo of the truck's exterior, confirmation of a pause with precise coordinates. If I was slow to respond, a response delay mark would appear. It wasn't a delivery delay, it was a click delay. I started driving thinking about the app, not the road. At each stage, I felt like I was feeding a machine that could reinterpret what I did later. In one of the submissions during that period, the app rejected a document I attached due to illegibility. Everything looked perfect in the image. I attached another one, and it accepted it. 10 minutes later, it asked again. I attached it again. It accepted it. The feeling was that the system was testing my obedience, not my quality. Whoever controls the format controls the result, and the result could be changed without warning. In the middle of this week, I discovered another detail that the app didn't mention, but that my bank statement screamed at me. The suspension had triggered a risk adjustment in the digital wallet linked to the app, and my fuel card dropped to the minimum limit. I stopped at a gas station outside of Fernley, filled up only what I needed, and watched the pump shut off before the tank was full. It wasn't a lack of money. It was a lack of permission. The same logic as the empty fuel gauge, only now applied to diesel. I also saw my name disappear from a board in the yard of the warehouse where I used to pick up cargo. Other drivers still received calls and entered normally. I wasn't physically prohibited from entering. I was invisible to the system. When I tried to understand, the app repeated that it was an automatic process and that any attempt to circumvent the flow could worsen my rating. The threat wasn't physical. It was professional, silent, and came in neutral phrases that sounded like advice but carried the weight of a sentence. When the restriction period ended, my score didn't go back down. It just stopped falling. The dashboard remained empty of good deals, full of leftovers with tight windows and low values. The standard message was always the same. Your profile will be automatically reevaluated. It never said when. It never said by what criteria. It never said what, exactly, I should do besides obeying the same format that had already brought me down. I tried to find a person. The support was a series of automated responses, always referring back to the report and repeating that decisions were based on data and had no exceptions. At no point did anyone address the main contradiction. The application recommended the detour, promised zero impact, and then used that as evidence against me. It was like arguing with a stamp. The stamp doesn't answer. It only confirms. The final understanding came with bitter clarity. I wasn't being punished for something logical. I was being punished for participating in a flow where any path generated enough log space to justify a penalty. Sticking to the original route would have created a different log and probably a different reason. Accepting the detour created the reason that struck me. The system didn't need to be right. It just needed to work and log. On the night the notification of continued suspension appeared, I didn't feel anger. I felt the kind of fear that you can't point a finger at. It was like being trapped in a contract that only one party can rewrite, with timestamps I don't control, and a single button that always pushes me to accept. Today I operate with limited access, accepting what comes up, meticulously recording everything and avoiding any choice that seems optional, because I've learned that what seems optional becomes a trap when the rules change later. I've lost clients, lost routes, lost predictability. There's no one in charge, no review, no face. Just a short warning, an empty dashboard, and a system that operates without needing to explain anything. That courtyard was too good to be true, and that's what put me at risk. It wasn't just the lighting and the fence. It was the way everything worked without demanding attention. The cameras were positioned too high to be bothersome. The signs were too clear to cause confusion, and the entrance guided the truck like a corridor. There was no improvisation. There was no choice. You just followed. The asphalt was smooth. The parking spaces were wide, and even the noise seemed controlled, as if the place had been designed to convince you that nothing bad could happen there. I would stop at that spot because it saved me effort. Always the same sector, almost always the same parking space, almost always at the same time. I'd check the seal, go around, climb up, close the curtain, and let my body switch off. When the road gets tiring, any place that makes things easier becomes a habit. And habit, I learned too late, is what a smart person uses against you without even having to touch you. I arrived early that night. The sky was clear, and the asphalt still reflected the white light from the yard, as if it had been washed. I should have gone straight to the routine, but I sat a little longer watching the trucks lined up. All straight. All motionless. The amber headlights seemed to pulse slowly, and the air smelled of old fuel mixed with detergent. It was a kind of cleanliness that doesn't belong on the highway. When I got out, I saw that my truck was a little further ahead of the line painted on the ground. Not out of place. Not wrong. Just too precise. I always left a little slack. There, I didn't remember being so exact. The white line was almost touching the tire, as if someone had carefully pushed the assembly a few centimeters, just enough for me to notice if I were the kind of person who notices. I thought maybe I had pulled over more calmly because I had arrived early. I adjusted my memory and continued on. I needed an explanation that wouldn't make me seem like someone who loses control over centimeters. On the side step, I noticed a different shine on a specific spot of the metal. Recent wear over old wear, as if someone had used the same footrest more often than usual. It didn't look like dirt. It looked like repetition. I ran my finger over it and felt the metal smoother in that area, as if a shoe sole had rubbed there instead of just stepping on it. I climbed into the cabin and tidied up what was loose. The flashlight was on the dashboard, parallel to the edge, with the lens pointing outwards. I wouldn't leave it like that. I put things where my hand could reach, not where it seemed right. I held the flashlight for a moment and felt the strange shame of being suspicious of an object. I put it in the overhead compartment and closed the little door with a little more force than necessary. From the outside, I checked the seal. Intact. No mark. The trunk latch, however, was closed with a care I rarely applied. The lever was fitted at the exact angle like a manual drawing. It was too precise to be automatic. I felt the urge to unlock and lock it again, just to regain the feeling that I was the one who had set it. I didn't unlock it. I touched the cold metal, breathed, and went back into the cabin. I locked it from the inside. I'd done it so many times in my life that I'd never thought about the gesture. That night I did. The lock made a dry click, and I listened to the silence afterward as if waiting for a response. I turned off the light and tried to sleep. The yard continued operating. An engine started in the distance. Another truck passed slowly, tires screeching on the damp asphalt. Everything normal. Too normal to attract attention. The normality there seemed rehearsed. There were no shouts, no arguments, nothing that broke the pattern. It was as if the place had learned to keep people quiet. I woke up to no sound. I looked at the dashboard and saw that the truck's clock was 2 minutes different from my wristwatch. I always kept them the same. I corrected the time and held my finger on the button for a moment longer than necessary. 2 minutes don't change a delivery, but they change the feeling that time is yours. And I didn't know if that discrepancy had appeared on its own or if someone wanted me to notice. I went to the bathroom and passed a line of trucks. On one of them, the rearview mirror was folded inward, as if someone had passed very close. I didn't connect it to me, not yet. I just remembered the detail. When you drive enough, you learn that details you remember come back later, in the wrong way. When I returned, the inner curtain was folded straighter. No longer open, no longer closed, just aligned. I didn't adjust curtains. I pulled them and left them. That fold looked like care, and care that didn't come from me. I sat on the edge of the bench for a few seconds, looking at the curtain as if it might unravel and reveal what I was avoiding seeing. Before trying to sleep again, I went downstairs and took another walk around the set. The mark on the step was still there. Near the electrical cable support, there was a thin scratch on the metal, like a light scratch made without force. It didn't look like vandalism. It looked like a test. And I knew testing well. When someone tests, they haven't yet decided if they're going to do something. You're measuring the response. On the asphalt, near the rear axle, a mark almost erased by the dampness caught my attention simply because it was in the wrong place. It wasn't a symbol. It didn't point to anything. It was a short line, as if someone had placed chalk there just to mark a reference point. I looked at the lines on the ground, at the position of my tire, and I thought about alignment. I thought about measuring distances between trucks. I thought about someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. I looked around and saw no one. That should have ended the matter. It didn't. The worst part about seeing no one is that you have no one to be angry with. I left early the next morning. Not because I needed to, but because I didn't want to repeat the schedule. I was already annoyed by the predictability itself. As I left the yard, the tracking system registered the automatic event. The time was a few minutes ahead of the actual departure time. I refreshed the screen. The time remained the same. It wasn't a delay, it wasn't a glaring error. It was as if someone had pushed the pointer with their fingertip. On the highway, I pulled over to the shoulder and reviewed the records. Entry, stop time, exit. Everything was consistent. Only the minutes didn't match my memory. It wasn't a big mistake. It was too small an adjustment to be an accident. The feeling that someone could tamper with what should be indisputable left a metallic taste in my mouth. I kept driving and started noticing things I never counted. How many times I checked the seal. How many times I touched the door handle. How many times I looked in the mirror. I didn't do it by choice. My body did it on its own, as if it had received a silent instruction during the night. On the first fill-up, I noticed the fuel tank cap was perfectly closed. I used to twist and release it. There, it was too tight. I went back to the cab and felt the seat was a little lower than I remembered. Not much. Just one level. The kind of difference you only feel because your hips recognize the exact spot. I adjusted it back, and the lever made a short sound, as if it had been moved recently. At the second parking spot, I saw an almost invisible sticker on the rear bumper. Transparent. It only showed up when the light hit it at an angle. I ripped it off with my fingernail, but the glue remained. That was worse. Glue doesn't become an incident report. It doesn't lead to a complaint. But it doesn't disappear. And the fact that someone stuck something in a place I don't constantly observe meant that someone had time near my truck without fear of being seen. On the first delivery of the day, the system released the dock without delay. The automatic receipt showed an arrival time a few minutes before I crossed the gate. No one to question it, just a record confirming that I was there before I actually arrived. I kept the folded paper as if I were collecting something that, in the end, I would never have the courage to show anyone. Later, the app marked a short pause at a point on the road where I hadn't stopped. A moment of stillness in a place I'd driven straight past. I looked at the map and saw the stop perfectly aligned with a service exit, one of those that almost nobody uses. It didn't seem random. It seemed deliberate. My day turned into a sequence of small, broken certainties. When I stopped for a shower at night, I came back and found the papers in the compartment reversed. Nothing missing. Nothing crumpled. Just reversed. I moved it and put it back as it was before, and realized the absurdity of my reaction. I was restoring the order to prove that I was still in charge. That thought shocked me, because I couldn't remember the last time I felt the need to prove that to myself. The next day I lifted the hood to check a level and saw a clean mark in the dust on the interior plastic, like a quick touch. I hadn't opened the hood that night, and yet the mark was there, round, simple, like a finger that touches and then slowly disappears. I closed the hood carefully, my hand trembling just enough to annoy me. I tried to force myself to think like an adult. Every truck passes through human hands, through mechanics, gas station attendants, yard workers. But nothing there came with a reason. There was no leak, no maintenance, no order, nothing. It was interference without a visible purpose, and that's what leaves the brain stuck. In the middle of the afternoon, I stopped at a busy place to eat. I returned and found the flashlight back on the dashboard, parallel, in the same alignment. I had stored it in the overhead compartment. The little door was closed correctly. There was no sign of force, of haste, of mess. Just one thing out of place. Out of place exactly as before. As if someone were insisting on a single detail to see when I would admit that I was being led. That's when understanding clicked. It didn't come as a shock. It came as a weight. It wasn't someone trying to steal. It wasn't someone seeking confrontation. It was someone measuring routine, confirming predictability, testing how far they could go without provoking a reaction. Each detail wasn't meant to scare me. It served to map my attention, what I perceived, what I ignored, how much I depended on repetition. I thought about the clean courtyard, the high cameras, the clear signs. I thought about the entrance corridor that makes you walk in line. I thought about how I always stopped in the same area, in the same sector, at the same pace. And I understood what had bothered me most from the beginning. Everything there had been designed for me to believe that security came from the place, not from me. I never went back to that courtyard. Today I don't stop twice in the same place. I don't repeat schedules. I deliberately change the order of things inside the cabin. I switch the side I use to get out. I park in different spots even if it's harder to maneuver. I leave the truck slightly crooked when the route demands perfection, just so I don't deliver predictability for free. And most importantly, I stopped trusting environments that work too well. Because when everything is exactly as it should be, someone has already been there before you. This time, not to stay, just to adjust you.